When Jimmy Carter assumed the presidency, he had a very ambitious agenda. Some people said you can't do everything all at once, just try to do a few things. And he basically did not follow that advice. He thought that a lot needed to be done, and he would approach these issues, many at the same time. When you look at the foreign policy side of his agenda, one priority was getting a treaty with Panama. The United States had a canal in Panama that it owned, and this was very much resented by the people of Panama, and there were starting to be outbreaks of violence, and he felt that the Panamanians could run the canal and this would be good for peace. And he was able to convince the Congress to approve the Panama Canal Treaty, which did improve our relations with Panama and frankly with all of Latin America. What President Carter will probably be most remembered for are the Camp David Peace Accords. It's called the Camp David Peace Accords because it took place at Camp David, which is a rural retreat that presidents use just outside the city of Washington. He believed that the major danger to Israel was the army of Egypt. Israel had had many wars with its neighbors, and its most dangerous foe was Egypt, who had a large standing army. So President Carter called to Camp David President Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel. The negotiations were very contentious, but on the 12th day, they finally reached agreement. And the basics of the agreement was that Israel would return to Egypt some of the land that had been seized during the 1967 war, and in exchange, Egypt would recognize the right of Israel to exist and no longer be a military threat to Israel. These negotiations went on in September of 1978. It did take many months to finalize the treaty, but in March of 1979, there was a very glorious signing ceremony on the White House lawn, and you had the President of Egypt, the Prime Minister of Israel shaking hands and smiling broadly as they signed a new peace treaty. On the foreign side, there were also many crises that President Carter had to deal with. One was after the Shah of Iran, who was a very close American ally, was overthrown. The price of oil went way up because of the disruption in the world oil market, and American hostages were seized in Tehran, the capital of Iran. Although it took a long time to get them released, they were eventually released, all safe and sound. On the domestic side, President Carter had many priorities as well. One was to try to reduce America's dependence on foreign oil. We had suffered through the Arab oil embargo in 1973 and 74, and we knew that that was a situation that needed to be addressed. And he supported more efficient automobiles, he supported the use of alternate energy, and he switched to other fuels for the production of electricity. And all these measures together helped sharply reduce the amount of oil that was imported in the United States and increase national security. On the environmental side, he was active in many areas. Under President Carter, we created more parkland than any president since Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of this land was sensitive land in Alaska, but he also was a champion of parks in urban areas, a kind of a new idea at the time, but these urban parks are now an important part of our national park system. As was the case when he was governor, he was also a reformer. He moved to deregulate a lot of industries like the airlines and trains and buses and oil prices, and so helped modernize the economy. He also tried to modernize government institutions, and he instituted civil service reform. He started the concept of inspectors general to have closer monitoring of the expenditure of federal money. So across the board, there are many accomplishments, both in the foreign policy side and the domestic side, during his 4-year term as president.
Well, I would say the main thing was that I kept our country at peace. I had been in the Navy as a professional military officer for 11 years, and I knew the devastating effects of war, so I was determined to to maintain peace, not only between the United States and other people like the Soviet Union and so forth, but to bring peace to other nations like between Egypt and Israel. I also promoted human rights, which was kind of an extension of civil rights at home, where every person in different countries around the world had freedom from abuse by their own political leaders. And this was especially effective in Latin America, where most of the countries were dictatorships when I became president, but 5 or 6 years later, all of the countries in South America had become democracies, and still are. And I would say that those two things were the most important, peace and human rights. And I was very proud of some of the practical things that I did. We, as I said, brought peace between Israel and Egypt. We normalized diplomatic relations with China, and we treated everybody around the world as equals and promoted human rights.
Carter set out a new agenda for the nation, and one of them was to try to bring peace around the world. He will always be remembered for the Camp David peace accords, which brought a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, the Panama Canal Treaty, which greatly improved American relations with Latin America, and other major international agreements. On the domestic front, he will be remembered for the attention he put on America's energy policy. The big concern at that time, coming so soon after the Arab oil embargo, was U.S. dependence on foreign oil. And he was quite successful in reducing America's dependence on foreign oil. Those were difficult times economically, but there is a strong record there that forms an excellent legacy.